Welcome to the Stanley Cup Pod. On this show, we will discuss this year's Stanley Cup playoffs in the National Hockey League, as well as some other things hockey related. Throughout the hour, we'll be speaking to different guests, getting their thoughts on specific teams, matchups, and more. Disclaimer, some parts were recorded before specific matchups were known, so all information heard in each of the segments was information known at the present time of the taping. Enjoy! My first guest is as much a sports guy as I am, and hockey might not be at the top of his agenda, but he has a lot of interesting takes on it as well as other sports. Please welcome the Stanley Cup Pod's inaugural guest, Mr. Jack MacArthur. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right, Jackson. Really looking forward to talking about some hockey. As you know, more of an NBA guy, but hey, I'm always hyped to talk about some hockey. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty okay. Jack, I wanted to start with this because we have 6 series already set, games wrapping up today, the end of the regular season. So we know in the East, it'll be the Caps and the Rangers, Islanders, Hurricanes, Maple Leafs, Bruins, Panthers, Lightning, Avalanche, Jets, and Canucks, Predators. Are any of those series sticking out to you as must watch, can't miss? Which one you're looking forward to most?
I think that the one that I'm looking forward to the most has to be the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs, just because they're both near the top of their division. You know, the Bruins, they have 109 points this season with 47 wins and just 20 losses. The Maple Leafs right behind them with 46 wins and 26 losses. And the Maple Leafs, obviously have Austin Matthews. He's a great player. And I think that series is going to be extremely entertaining. I think that out of all the series, first round series, that's going to be the most entertaining one that I have to watch.
And I know that you follow the NBA kind of a little bit more, and right now they have the play-in tournament going on to determine the 7 and 8 seeds in each of the conferences. And of course, the NHL has a little bit of a different playoff format where in each division, the top 3 teams get an automatic playoff berth, and then the final 2 spots are up in the wild card. They're up for grabs. Do you think that the in-season tournament style that the NBA does is something that the NHL could adopt for their postseason format?
Yeah, I think that it's something that they could adopt. I'm not a huge fan personally of the in-season tournament. I think that they already have a really long season, in all professional sports, especially MLB. I think they have 162 games. With the NBA, it's 82. Hockey, they have a lot of games too. I think that they could adopt it, but in my opinion, I think that it's not that beneficial because the players already have a super long season and it's just they're kind of dragging it out in my opinion. But that may be a hot take. But what do you think, Jackson? Are you a fan of the playoff
You
format
know,
they have?
that's a good question because to be honest with you, I have not watched much NBA this season, and I have not really tuned into much of the in-season tournament that's going on this week. I think it's an interesting format, and I think it would be kind of interesting to see the NHL maybe try a trial run with it. Perhaps, in each division, maybe you have 6 teams in each division and the top 2 get that automatic berth, and then you would have 3, 4, 5, 6 fighting for those final 2 spots. You could have the 3 versus the 4 and the 5 versus the 6, and the winner of the 5-6 plays the loser of the 3-4 in each conference. I think that would be something that I would not be opposed to see, like I said, like a trial run, because I think it's interesting the way that the NBA does that, just to, include a little bit more teams in the playoffs. Instead of having 8, they have 10 fighting for the last 2 spots. I think it would be really interesting, but considering how the playoff format is now, and I'll say this because I was talking to one of my friends the other day watching the Red Wings game, just the way the wild card and the divisions work in the NHL, it screwed the Red Wings out of being in the playoffs because they had a better record than the Washington Capitals, who snuck into that last wild card spot. But because of all the tie breaks and the way that the playoff is formatted, the Capitals got that second wild card spot over Detroit. So, a lot of unhappy people in Michigan. Got a feel for them. They did what they needed to do in their final game. And I think because of that, it would be fascinating to see the NHL kind of adopt this sort of thing, give it a test run. If it fails, go back to what they've done that's worked before. And, if it seems to be a success, maybe try it again the next year after that, and, continue to work with it.
Yeah, it's not a bad take. And just a correction, I meant to say playoff play-in tournament. The in-season tournament, it's obviously different, but Yeah, I mean, the in-season tournament this year for the NBA, that was extremely interesting. It's kind of a money grab also, in my opinion, just because they're trying to make the NBA more exciting and just have more fans just by having the in-season tournament. But for the play-in tournament, I've kind of accepted it now, even though I'm not a huge fan of it. I do think that if, as you mentioned, I agree with you. If the NHL were to implement something similar to what the NBA is doing with the play-in tournament, where you have those extra couple ninth and 10th seeds, they have the chance to fight to get a playoff spot. I think that that would be cool.
Well, Jack, thanks for popping on, and congratulations on being guest number one on this show. Let's go Stanley Cup playoffs, and hope to see a bracket from you.
Okay, sounds good. I guess real quick before we end this, I gotta say, let's just go over this real quick. Who do you think is going to win it all this postseason?
Hmm. I am going to reveal my prediction in our final segment of the show, so make sure you
Okay,
stay tuned for that. But
sounds
for the
good.
moment,
So
Jack, this will be the only time that you're on. I'd like to get your prediction, please.
let's go. This may be a hot take, but let's go. Let's go Toronto Maple Leafs. Austin Matthews had a great season. 69 goals this season and 38 assists with 107 points, which is the sixth most among all NHL players. And he's played 81 games this season. So I think that he's one of the best players in the league. So I think that he's going to lead them to go pretty far. And I think that this is a hot take, but I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win it all.
All right, Jack, that's a interesting prediction. We'll see how far they can go. Once again, stay tuned for our final segment where I will reveal my Stanley Cup prediction. Jack, thanks for being my first guest, and talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Jackson. See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Stanley Cup Pod. It's time for a trivia question, and the question is, who was the last Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup? And we will reveal the answer at the end of our next segment. Welcome back to the Stanley Cup Pod. My next guest, who is as big a hockey fan as I, his team actually is the top team in the Western Conference, and of course, he is representing them today by wearing a green jacket. Please welcome Dallin Meekum. Dallin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a great day. Stars just beat the Blues, so I'm on cloud nine right now.
I didn't even mention that yet, but of course, yep, now you know his team is the Dallas Stars, who are the number one seed in the Western Conference. They are Central Division champs for the first time in quite a bit of time. Dallin, I want to get your thoughts on the playoff series that we know that are taking place right now. We'll start in the East just because we know all the matchups that are going to take place here in round one. We have the Capitals taking on the Rangers, the Islanders taking on the Hurricanes, Bruins and Maple Leafs, as well as the Panthers and Lightning. Do any of those series stick out to you as ones that are going to be interesting, or which ones you're looking forward to most?
Surprisingly, I think there's actually a good chance that the second wild card takes down the President's Trophy winners, the Caps beating the Rangers. And it's actually an even series between the two. Both teams have won twice against each other, so I think that would be an interesting one. And then Boston and Toronto, I always put Toronto losing in the first round as like the free space in bingo. So
we have two series that are locked in on the West so far. We will have the Winnipeg Jets taking on the Colorado Avalanche, and we also know that the Vancouver Canucks will be taking on the Nashville Predators. Any of those series pique your interest?
I think Nashville actually has a really good chance against the Canucks. Nashville's been playing pretty well late in the season, and the Canucks have kind of just not plateaued, but kind of slowed off a bit. So I think that one would be really interesting, and I think Winnipeg has Colorado's number, and so because the closest Colorado's been to Winnipeg in the 3 games, they lost by 2, and they've lost by 4 and by 7. So hasn't been super close in those games.
Now we transition kind of over to where you probably want to go with your Dallas Stars. One of two possibilities for the first round is you will either already have a rematch of the team that took you down in the West Final last year in the Vegas Golden Knights, or the more likely scenario will be the Los Angeles Kings. And I know that you kind of hinted more at wanting to play the LA Kings. Can you just kind of explain why you feel that way?
I think the Stars' game plan fits really well against LA, and it's kind of showed the 3 games they've played against them, the games have been 5-1, 4-1, and 4-1. So it hasn't really been close. But what's interesting to me with that series is that Scott Wedgwood, the Stars' backup goaltender, has played really well against the Kings. And so the Stars head coach, Pete DeBoer, has said that there's a chance that Scott Wedgwood might start against the Kings, even though Jake Ottinger has been playing really well recently. So we'll have to see if that one lines up. But if it's Vegas, then I think the Stars have a good matchup against them too. The Stars are 0-2-1 against Vegas this season, but I don't know how much season records really matter come playoff time, because playoff hockey is a whole different animal. But I think the Stars can match up really well against Vegas. I don't think anyone really wants to play Dallas because they have a shutdown defense and a score at will kind of offense. So I think it would be interesting no matter who they get.
We already know the 16 teams that are going to be in the playoffs. Of the 16, so again, in the East, we have Florida, Boston, Toronto, the Rangers, Carolina, the Islanders, Lightning, and Capitals. And in the West, we have Dallas, Winnipeg, Colorado, Vancouver, Edmonton, Vegas, Nashville, and Los Angeles. Of those 16 teams, which do you believe kind of poses the biggest threat or could kind of make a big statement here this year?
I'm going to start with my biased opinion. I think the Stars are the biggest threat, and here's why I say that. They have 8 players that have scored 20 or more goals. The last time that happened was like 1990s. Like, it's been a while. And I think that team ended up winning the cup. I want to say it was Detroit, but yeah, have 8 20-goal scorers. You have another that's on the verge of 20, and the Stars goaltenders are kind of playing out of their mind recently, and their defense has been super good. So I think overall it should be not a easy path, but I think a path that the Stars are willing to take. And they have 3 lines that can score at will, then a forechecking line that kind of runs you over in your own zone. So I really like the Stars' chances in this year. But if I had to go a non-biased opinion, I don't know. It's kind of hard to pick. I think the Carolina Hurricanes are probably who I would pick. I think they're a really solid defensive team. They block a lot of shots, which, especially late in games, from experience, it gets really annoying when you just shoot at will and there's too many bodies in the way and you just can't get one through, especially if you're down late. And I think they're a really good shutdown team. And so I think if I had to go a non-biased opinion, I think the Hurricanes are probably who I would pick to win.
And of course, you talked about the Rangers being the President's Trophy champions, and you kind of mentioned that you might like the Capitals as an upset just because usually sometimes the curse can come in for the President's Trophy team to drop in the first round. We saw that with the Bruins last year. And of course, the last President's Trophy team to win the cup was Chicago back in 2013. But my next question for you, because I want to ask, we had learned the news, and I know that, your big following is the Dallas Stars, but another team in the West that we heard is going to be moving, the Arizona Coyotes, heading up to Salt Lake City, Utah. I just want to get your thoughts on that whole scenario down there and, your opinion on the Coyotes moving to Utah.
So I haven't really had much against the Coyotes, being a Stars fan. Like, even though they're in our division, it's not like a bitter rival. I think moving out of Mullet Arena is going to be good for them. It is going to be weird not calling them the Phoenix Coyotes or the Arizona Coyotes. I think they're still going to stay the Coyotes. And I watched the last minute, and it was cool that the broadcasters just went silent for like the last 20 or 30 seconds just to let people hear like the last sounds of Coyotes hockey in Arizona. But I think moving to Salt Lake is going to be really good for them. I think Utah has needed a NHL team, but I think the Jazz owner is going to do a good job with them. He's all on board with it, and I think they're going to get a good venue. Salt Lake is a great place for sports. In fact, they're getting an Olympics not too far down the future, and so I think that's going to be super good for them, and I'm kind of excited to see how they fit them in. Obviously, they're not having a new stadium built. They're just going to merge with the Jazz. And
The Jazz are the Utah team in the NBA, for those of you that are not aware or maybe don't follow as much basketball, but the Utah Jazz are an NBA team that are located in Salt Lake City.
yeah, and there's quite a few NHL teams that merge with NBA teams and share a stadium. There's the Stars and the Dallas Mavericks. There's the Los Angeles Kings and the Clippers, and there's a few more. And I want to say the Celtics and the Bruins both do. But so I think they do a good job. The NHL will make sure that they have a good crew for that, and I think it'll be cool. It was a cool tribute to the fans last night after Arizona winning, and a bunch of fans got the jerseys off of the back of players, and one of them was actually his first NHL game, and so one fan got his very first NHL jersey, which I think is kind of funny because as a rookie you probably want to hold on to that, but I think it's a good tribute to fans, and I think the Coyotes' future is going to be good because the city of Glendale hasn't really been good to them the last few years.
I have one final question for you, and I know we touched on this a little bit before we started recording. We were talking about the NHL's playoff format and how it used to just be in each conference, it would be the top 8 teams. They did that for a while, and then, of course, 2020 hit and we had COVID. So they had to change things up just because of like all the travel restrictions within the United States and also Canada because there's Canadian teams. So it used to be just the top 8 teams in each conference would battle it out, and the 2 conference winners would meet in the Cup final. And back in 2020 when we had COVID, I know that they changed things up a little bit with each of the 4 divisions, the Atlantic and the Metropolitan on the east side and the Pacific and Central on the west side. And of course, there was the chance where we would have a typical divisional matchup in the Stanley Cup final of what we got with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Montreal Canadiens both being in that Atlantic division. But of course, with the COVID rules, they were able to meet in the Stanley Cup final. And since COVID, they have changed it again to where in each division, it's the top 3 teams that get an automatic playoff spot. And then for each conference, so like you have in the East, you have the top 3 in the Atlantic and the top 3 in the Metropolitan Division automatically earn a playoff spot, as well as in the West, top 3 in the Pacific, top 3 in the Central. And then within each conference, you have 2 more wildcard spots that can be occupied by anyone, regardless of division. I just want to ask what you think about that playoff format, or like which playoff format you preferred, if you preferred the one we had for years up until COVID, if you preferred the one we had during COVID, or the one that we have now.
I think it's interesting. So it's kind of funny how it hasn't ever been like, if going back to the terms of the 1 versus 8 rule, there hasn't been like the 9 seed in the playoffs, which is possible with this format, but it's kind of insane. But I think makes it even more even, and the teams are more even, and which makes for really good hockey. I loved watching the Kings run as the 8 seed when they won the cup, and just kind of taking down everyone in 7 games. But I like this format. I think it's pretty cool. I think if you are top of your division, you deserve it to play one of the lower teams that make it, and I think goes for both divisions because no division is easy to win. I do think there is some that are a little more top heavy than others. Like, I think the Central and the Atlantic Division are the hardest divisions to win, just with how competitive they are. But I think it matches it up pretty well. It is kind of interesting playing a team that isn't in your division in the first round, and sometimes even in the second round. And because the first and second are usually just divisional rounds. And then obviously the third is the conference round. And then, of course, you have the fourth as the finals. But I like the format. Yeah, I like it. And I think Texas is kind of in a championship mode with the Rangers just winning the World Series. You have the Mavericks, which are contender for the number one. I don't watch any NBA intentionally, but every now and then I'll hear a little bit about them, and I've heard that they're doing good. And the Stars winning the West, I think they're also due for a championship. So the Dallas Metroplex is looking like a good place for championships.
For those of you that are unaware, Dallin here, he does not care for the Dallas Cowboys, which is why I think he probably did not mention them at all in the thing he just said about Dallas teams. But don't forget the Cowboys are down there as well, but they have not won a Super Bowl since before 2000. I want to ask as well, because just in the last few years, the NBA, I know this is supposed to be a hockey podcast, but I just want to ask, because I know the NBA has started this play-in tournament for the last couple of seasons for the playoffs. Do you think that is something that the NHL could also adopt?
Here's my thoughts on the play-in tournament. I think it's ridiculous. I don't know why you need two tournaments a year. I think there should only be one tournament, and it's the finals. I think it totally degrades the final tournament, and I don't see a whole lot of value to having a play-in tournament. So I don't think the NHL is going to go there, and I just don't want them to. I think the NBA should get rid of it. But yeah, it's not something I would look forward to. Playoff time. So in the regular season, teams ramp up their play near the end because it's coming playoff time, and having two of those is going to kind of throw off the system, and I think you're just not going to get as good of games come actual playoff time. So I think the play-in tournament is kind of ridiculous, and I wish they would get rid of it. But again, I don't watch much of the NBA, but it kind of gave me another reason to not to. So
Dallin, before I let you go here, I just want to get your prediction. And I know that you're probably going to say Dallas, but I just want you to try your hardest. Your champion in the West and your champion in the East, who do you believe is going to meet in the Stanley Cup final? And who do you think is going to win the Stanley Cup final? And how long do you think that series is going to last?
So I'm actually going to pick two teams one team from each conference on who I think is a good upset pick. And I'm going to go with Washington and probably Nashville. So those are two teams I think could do some damage as wildcard teams. But if I had to pick a team out of the East, it would probably be Carolina. And I think Dallas is just going to run over whoever they face. But if I had to have a non-biased opinion, I think, as much as I would hate to say it, I think Vegas has a good chance because they just have the playoff experience and know what it takes to have a deep playoff run.
You can't count out the champions until they're out.
Yeah, which is crazy thinking the Stars could play Vegas. They could win the conference and play the defending Stanley Cup champions. It's just kind of crazy how that matches up. I do think there's some high-ranked teams that might get bounced early, and I will probably pick them too. But I think it's going to be even series all around. There's never any easy run-throughs in this playoffs. So I think it'll be really entertaining, but I think Dallas versus Carolina. It would be a heavy defensive matchup, and one that I would definitely look forward to.
You had mentioned that the Predators could be a team to watch out for. Stay tuned, everyone, because in my next segment, I will actually be speaking to someone who knows quite a bit about Nashville. But for now, Dallin, thank you for your time, for popping on today. Wishing your Stars luck in the playoffs, and thanks for being a guest.
Yeah, thank you, and go Stars.
Thanks for listening to the Stanley Cup Pod. The answer to our first trivia question was 1993. The Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup, and no Canadian team has won it since. In fact, 6 times since that year have Canadian teams even made it to the Cup final. The Canucks made it in 1994. Calgary made it in 2004, the Oilers in 2006, Senators in 2007, Canucks again in 2011, and the Canadiens of Montreal were back just a few years ago in 2021. Our second trivia question is, who was the last team to repeat as back-to-back Stanley Cup champions? The answer after our next segment. Back here on the Stanley Cup Pod, we touched earlier on teams that never have won the Cup, Predators, of course, being one of them. My next guest is new to the Nashville area, but after about 8-ish months of living there, she has grown fond of her Preds and other sports down there as well. But this time of year, she will probably be rooting for Nashville in the postseason. She joins me now, and she also happens to be my sister, Molly. How are you?
Good. How are you doing today, Jackson?
Not bad. So we know the first round matchup for your Nashville Predators. They are going to be taking on the Pacific Division champion Vancouver Canucks. Just your initial thoughts on that series.
Oh, it's going to be a good series, I think. The Preds are strong when it matters. We're a comeback team now, Jackson. We started our season 5-10, and we are still here in the playoffs making it. So I'm looking forward to this series.
So Nashville will be hosting games 3, 4, and possibly 6 if the series goes that long. I know you have been to a couple of games during the regular season, and I've heard that Bridgestone Arena could be one of the toughest places in the league to play. How would you describe the environment that you've been around down there?
It's a different environment. We didn't have an NHL team where I grew up, so it was like a minor league team, whatever they're called, WHL, and it's just a complete different status. I mean, it's like comparing apples to oranges, because like I walk into Bridgestone and it's just lively. It's everybody's cheering for the same team, even if you're wearing different uniforms. Like when I took my friend who's from Seattle, he wore a Kraken uniform. I mean, it's just a bunch of hockey fans in one arena and all cheering for a team that they love, because Nashville's so beloved as a city that it just really shows in the arena, I would say.
Aside from Vancouver and Nashville, do any of the other round 1 series pique interest to you? Do you sense a lot of upsets or sweeps in the opening round?
I could see that happening. I'm a big fan of the Golden Knights. I love Vegas as a city, as a team. I think they make some mistakes, but they always bounce back strong. So I'm excited to see how their series will go. And of course, New York being the best team, best seed this year, presidential champions, I think will be a good time.
Kind of transition into my final question I have prepared here is, of the 16 playoff teams that we now know, which teams you think can make the longest run in each conference, or just your prediction of who will meet in the Cup final?
But it's so early to tell. I mean, New York is such a strong team this year. I'd say they'd probably be up there, I would say. Well, the Bruins, I would also be interested in their series because, you can never really count out Boston teams. They're always strong suited and they know how to work the rink. I mean, I like to root for an underdog, so I want to say my Preds. I want to say Vegas. And I never really think that you can count out the Stars. They always have a strong defense.
Is there anything else that you would like to add about either Nashville or just any of the teams before we wrap up here?
Go Preds. 2024, always go Preds.
All right, well, thanks for hopping on. Good luck to Nashville, and can't wait to see who you have winning in your bracket. Thanks for listening to the Stanley Cup Pod. The answer to our second trivia question was actually not too long ago. It was 2020 and 2021. The Tampa Bay Lightning won back-to-back Stanley Cups as they beat the Dallas Stars in 6 games in 2020, and they beat the Montreal Canadiens in 2021. That took 5 games. In fact, since the 21st century, only one other team in the NHL has repeated as Stanley Cup champions. That was back in 2016 and 17, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who beat the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators. They won both those series in 6 games. We progress forward here on the Stanley Cup Pod. I want to lean away from the NHL for a little bit and talk about another hockey league with playoffs currently going on, and that is the WHL, Western Hockey League, which is all part of the Canadian Hockey League and their championship tournament, the Memorial Cup. My next guest, who is currently back in my hometown of Portland, may not know as much about this as I, but she does know quite a bit. Please welcome Rory Myers. Rory, how are you this afternoon?
Hey, Jackson, I'm doing well. It's great to be here on your podcast.
Well, thanks for taking some time. Now, before we touch on the WHL playoffs and our hometown team Hawks, I want to get your thoughts on these first-round matchups in the NHL that we already know as of now, such as the Rangers taking on the Capitals, Islanders taking on the Hurricanes, Lightning and Panthers, Maple Leafs, Bruins, and then the one series that is set in the West, the Avalanche and the Jets. What are your initial thoughts on these matchups of like which one do you think is going to be fun to watch? Which ones are you looking forward to most?
For the first round in the Eastern Conference, I'm probably most looking forward to watching the number 2 seed Bruins and the number 3 seed Maple Leafs face each other. Given their records this season, I think that'd be a great matchup and a fun watch, as well as the Rangers versus Capitals. Rangers being one of the top teams this season, and then the Capitals barely slipping in under the wire into that wild card spot. I always look forward to a last minute clinch team go up against, one of the current best teams. So I think that one will be rather fun, and I hope they both give each other a run for their money. Looking at maybe going into the second round, I think what would be fun is the Panthers going and taking on the Bruins. Given their records last season and Bruins being like the top dog and then the Panthers taking them out in that first round, I think a rematch there would be super awesome and a very fun watch, especially if it comes down to the wire like it did before. And then another matchup, I think, for the second round, I'd really like to see the Canes go against the Islanders. I'd like to see the Islanders lose, the Rangers lose, and see the Canes and Capitals face each other as well. The Caps I know have, the superior record when facing the Canes, but I think that would be a great matchup to look forward to nonetheless. And then looking at the Western side of things with the Jets versus the Avalanche, I can't stand the Colorado, so I'd like to see Jets come out on top.
It's going to be an interesting first round, and I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well.
Okay, moving forward, now let's move away from the NHL for a little bit. I know you come from the same place as I in Portland. We have a WHL team in the Winterhawks, and they're having one heck of a year. We saw just a few nights ago that they overcame a 3-0 deficit in Game 3 against the Everett Silvertips to force overtime and win that game on a wild deflection goal to take a 3-0 series lead in that second round. What was your overall reaction to that game, and what has impressed you most about this team so far this year?
Even though I was confident they wouldn't lose the round against Everett, they're still sweeping. Given their history, I was pretty sure they weren't going to lose, and they're not going to lose this round. But I was still worried going into this game, especially since it was an away game. And I came in watching the game right before that third goal from Everett was scored. that breakaway goal by Hemmerling. And, my heart sank. I thought they were dropping their sweep. They went 4-0 against the Royals and everything. So I was nervous, but, nevertheless, came in on that breakaway goal. But then Carter Sutherland came in being the powerhouse that he is, hit that wrister, and only a few minutes later to put the Hawks on the board. And I think that's where their momentum started. They're really good at coming up from a deficit. There were multiple games that I went and saw by the Winterhawks that they were down quite a bit and came back to win it. And they're good in overtime. And so for the momentum to take over with Sutherland with that wrister, come back to win it in OT, it was amazing. As you know, my heart sank a little bit when the OT goal was a deflection. It always is a little bit difficult when it's not just like a straightforward goal out of talent, but kind of an accidental random bounce off the glass, off the goalie and into the net. But, nevertheless, they won it. I was impressed with their comeback and very excited for them to continue their perfect record in the playoffs so far. Yeah, so the game was great. I've loved their momentum this season. This season is really the first time I've really gone in depth into the Winterhawks. As you said earlier, you know about this stuff more than I do, but I'm really excited to see some of their top players like Sutherland, Kanani, and Katowski come out on top. I know some of them are being headhunted and such right now, so I'm pretty stoked about that.
I think I mentioned this before, but Portland is the 2 seed on the western side of the bracket. They're taking on Everett, the 3 seed. They took care of Victoria, the 7th seed, in the first round. So Portland has a 3-0 lead on Everett right now. The other series going on this side of the bracket, the number 1 seed in the West and the number 1 overall seed in the WHL playoffs, the Prince George Cougars, who won in overtime last night to take a 3-0 series lead on the Kelowna Rockets, who are the 5 seed, assuming that, Portland and Prince George, they're both up 3-0, will win one more game and move to the West final. It would start up north. So for Portland, they would be starting on the road. How do you feel that series would go?
Honestly, you've seen my bracket predictions. I'm very optimistic with the momentum of the Winterhawks right now. I think that they could continue taking the series. I'm not super in tune with how the West has gone. I know the Cougars were top dog. I was really excited to see the Winterhawks beat them in person back in January. But yeah, I'm not super in tune with it, but I am optimistic with the momentum that the Winterhawks have right now, and do think that they could continue to take the playoffs by storm.
And you mentioned earlier, because, Portland, of course, went 4-0 against Victoria in the first round. What would be interesting about that final, especially if Portland can beat Everett in Game 4 on Friday and Prince George defeats Kelowna in Game 4 tonight, both those teams still have not lost a game in the playoffs. So one of those teams would have to lose in that first game of the West Final. So it will definitely put a lot of pressure on both teams, and especially, for Portland, because they've started at home for their first 2 series, and now they would be going on the road. And, like I said, assuming that both teams win and sweep their series again, they would still be unbeaten going into that first game. So that would definitely set up an interesting series, and I think that it would be a fun series.
I definitely agree with you. I think it's going to be a nail biter.
Couple other notes here on the east side of the bracket. The number 1 seed Saskatoon has a 3-0 series lead on the number 5 seed Red Deer, and the Moose Jaw Warriors, the 2 seed, lead 2-1 over the 3 seed Swift Current Broncos. Both series with Game 4s that'll be played tonight. Is there anybody on that side of the bracket that makes you nervous?
Honestly, being the number 1 seed, Saskatoon is probably the one that makes me the most nervous, being that they're 3-0 in their series. That's probably where the nerves most come from. I would also say Moose Jaw, even though their lead is only 2-1 over the Swift Current, they're not sweeping like Saskatoon is. They also make me nervous. But again, I'm pretty optimistic. So we'll see how that goes.
And of course, for teams on both sides of the league, they don't really play cross league games as much. So like, Western Conference teams will play more Western Conference teams, and then Eastern Conference teams will play more Eastern Conference teams. So you don't really get that, West versus East until you really get to the postseason and in the WHL Championship Series. So it would be a team that you likely, don't play as often as you do with the teams that you played up until that point. So it would definitely be interesting, and going forward in the playoffs should be a fun next couple of weeks.
I agree.
Okay, now the final thing here is if Portland somehow escapes that series against Prince George and they also win the WHL championship and go to the Memorial Cup, which would be their first appearance in 11 years. They have not been there since they lost to Halifax in the final back in 2013. And of course, you mentioned earlier that you don't like the Colorado Avalanche. One of the players on the Halifax Mooseheads that beat Portland was Nathan McKinnon, who is one of the best players on Colorado. So it would be the first appearance for them since that loss in 2013. And the last 4 consecutive champions of the Memorial Cup have come from the QMJHL, which is the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. Where would you put your confidence meter going into the Memorial Cup if they are able to do so?
As of now, at the risk of jinxing it, because I'm a tad superstitious when it comes to hockey, but my confidence levels are very high. Again, I have only recently started tuning in to the Winterhawks side of things and such, but with their momentum, I think they have that momentum to take it all the way to the final round, and quite possibly, break the streak of the Quebec Junior League of what they currently hold over the rest of the Canadian Hockey League. I did not know about Nathan McKinnon who was on the Halifax team when the Winterhawks lost back in 2013. So that makes me more eager for them to make it and such, being that I have such a hatred for Colorado. I mean, you've seen my bracket predictions as well, and what I think, I'm obviously optimistic about my own hometown team, but I do have the, high confidence levels for them to take it all the way.
I want to go back to our discussion about the Eastern Conference playoffs, because 7 of the 8 teams in the East are the exact same teams that were in the playoffs last year, including the same exact first round matchup we had between the Islanders and the Hurricanes last year. Now, of course, in the Atlantic Division, Boston and Toronto, Florida and Tampa Bay, that was a little bit different because, you had Toronto versus Tampa Bay and Florida versus Boston. But just 7 of the 8 teams in the East playoffs this year were the same as last year. Just shows that they continued the dominance from last season.
This is true, especially, the Bruins coming out as another top team, the Rangers coming out as another top team. Capitals not so much, but yeah, it is crazy that we have 7 of the 8 same teams as last year.
The only team that did not make it this year that made it last year was the New Jersey Devils. But of course, they had their first round series against the New York Rangers last season, in which they won. They defeated the New York Rangers in 7 games. But I just think it was pretty odd to see that 7 of the 8 teams, and of course, the matchups, 2 of the matchups won't be the same, but one of the matchups will be the same with the Hurricanes and the Islanders. And pretty much we're just doing a flip-flop in the Atlantic Division, because you have Tampa Bay taking on Florida and Boston taking on Toronto, whereas last year you had Toronto taking on Tampa and Boston taking on Florida. And of course, that Boston team last year, they won the President's Trophy. For those of you that don't know what it means, to those listening, President's Trophy means that you had the best record in the league. They lost to Florida in 7 games, and lo and behold, the Florida Panthers, who came in as a wild card team, made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. They were down by 1, and they scored with a minute to go in Game 7. They ended up winning in overtime of Game 7, just starting their Cinderella run in the playoffs last year. So really looking forward to seeing what we are in store for this year's playoffs. And I say this every year, but, I just love this time of year because the playoffs get me so excited, and each year seems to build up as much hype as the year before.
I completely agree with you. The NHL is completely unpredictable and definitely my favorite sport to pay attention to when it comes to playoff season.
The 2024 Canadian Hockey League Memorial Cup presented by Kia will take place from May 24th to June 2nd in Saginaw, Michigan, which is hosted by the Saginaw Spirit of the OHL, Ontario Hockey League. Rory, we appreciate the time. Thanks for hopping on for a few minutes to talk a little hockey. And can we expect a bracket from you for the Stanley Cup?
You can expect a bracket from me, Jackson.
All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for hopping on.
Thank you so much, Jackson. It was an honor.
It's time for another fun fact. We just got done talking to Rory about the Memorial Cup. Since 1983, the Memorial Cup tournament has expanded to 4 teams, including 3 of the league champions from the WHL, QMJHL, and OHL, and that 4th spot goes to the host city's team. And everyone plays a round-robin tournament-style tournament, and whoever finishes with the best record automatically advances to the championship game. And if 2 teams are tied at the bottom, they play in a quarterfinal. The winner of that will play the team that had the second best record in the semifinal, and then whoever wins the semifinal will play that best record team in the championship game. Final segment here on the Stanley Cup Pod, and I am joined by 3 guys I know too well. I like to refer to them as the terrifying trio. I'm here with Patrick White, Jake Rowe, Camden Micrance. We'll start going clockwise sitting here. Pat, how are you?
Hello, Jackson. Patrick here, second semester student over at U of I, and I'm excited to do this with everyone.
All right, Pat, it's good to hear from you. Let's now go to Jake Rowe.
How's it going? My name's Jake Rowe. I am also, I'm a third-year student here at U of I, and I am juiced to get ready and get into this NHL podcast.
All right, Jake, nice introduction there. And now let's go finally over to Cam there.
I also am a first-year student at U of I. My name is Camden Micrance, as Jackson said, CNR major, and looking forward to talking about some playoffs, and hopefully these bad boy Bruins will take the Stanley Cup at the end.
It's time for us to give our final predictions here for round 1. Now that we know all the matchups that will be taking place in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I'll start us off, and then we'll go to Pat, then we'll go to Jake, then we'll go to Cam. And for the first round, we'll start in the East because that one was set first. The first matchup will be the Carolina Hurricanes, the number 2 seed in the Metropolitan Division, taking on the 3rd seed in the Metropolitan Division, the New York Islanders. And interesting thing here, guys, is that this was a matchup that we had in round 1 last year that the Hurricanes won in 6 games. And I think there's a little bit of a revenge factor here. So I'm going to take the Islanders here in this series, and I'm going to say this series also goes 6 games.
I got the Islanders.
Yep, I'm, personally a huge fan of contrasting colors, and I think orange and blue is just great. It looks good for the Mets, looks good for the Knicks. I think I'm going to have to rock with the Islanders here, support those guys over at in the Big Apple.
I'm going to have to take the Hurricanes because they used to be the Hartford Whalers.
All right, moving along here. Next matchup we have is the President's Trophy New York Rangers, the number 1 seed in the Metropolitan. They are going to be taking on the Washington Capitals, and, that's always a fun series. And I think the Rangers are going to get it done. The Caps just barely snuck in, taking that spot over Detroit and Pittsburgh. I'm going to say the Rangers here, and I'm going to say they get it done in 5.
I'll probably have to agree with Jackson. I got the Rangers here. I got them taking it in 4, actually. I got a little sweep.
As a patriot, I have to say that I can't betray my country. That would be treason. So I'm going to have to go with Washington in this series.
Yeah, I'm going to have to second that opinion with Jake. Also, Ovechkin's sick, and I appreciate Ovechkin, so I'll root for his team.
All right, next matchup we have in the East is the Atlantic Division, where we have the 2nd seed Bruins taking on the 3rd seeded Maple Leafs. And the Maple Leafs actually, they were able to finally get out of round 1 for the first time last year in 19 years. They go up against a tough Boston team. I don't think they have it. I'm going to take the Bruins here, but they always play each other well. I think this is going to be a 7-game series.
I'm going to agree with you on the Bruins taking this series. I'm going to go 1 game down and say they're taking it in 6.
I'm going to have to go with Boston. I think they're going to take it in 5.
I think Boston's for sure taking it. I do think it's going to be a good series. I agree. I don't know if it's going to go as far as 7 games, but I do think it's going to be into that 5 to 6 game series. So go Bruins.
All right, final matchup we have here in the first round on the east side is the Atlantic Division champion Florida Panthers. Of course, they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final last season, where unfortunately they fell in 5 games to the Vegas Golden Knights. They are going to be taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning, who last year lost in the first round to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So a little bit of redemption for them as they won back-to-back cups in 2020 and 2021. But I'm still going to roll with the Florida Panthers here. I'm going to say Florida wins, and I'm going to say this is a 6-game series.
Panthers in 5.
This is tough because 2 Florida teams, you can never win in that series. We will have to be cheering for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the series. Let's go.
Correct. I think I'm going to take – I don't like either of these teams. I don't like any Florida hockey teams, but Chuck is a dog. So let's go Panthers. And the Bruins will see him in the Eastern – actually, they'll see him in round 2, so hopefully they get the dub. I'm making an early prediction. Sorry, Jack.
Let's move over to the West, in which we did not have it set until last night when the season wrapped up, of course. The Vegas Golden Knights, they choked against the Anaheim Ducks. They had the number 3 in the Pacific locked up. All they had to do was secure a point against Anaheim, and, of course, they lost. So the LA Kings, who beat the Chicago Blackhawks, jumped them and took that 3rd seed in the Pacific. So the Vegas Golden Knights, the second wildcard team, they're going to be taking on the top team in the conference, the champions out of the Central Division, the Dallas Stars. It's a rematch of last year's Western Conference Final. It's going to be an interesting series, but I think the Stars are going to prevail. I'm going to take Dallas here, and I'm going to take Dallas in 6.
Dallas in 6, Jackson. I'm going to go with Vegas, man. I mean, look at them. That's a night. Vegas in 7.
I'm going to have to follow what floats my boat, and I'm going to have to pick Vegas. And actually, I think Vegas might win this in 6 games.
Being a Nevadan, I'm going to rep the Knights, and they're cool and all, but fuck Vegas. So go Stars.
All right, next up, we have the 2nd seed in the Central Division, the Winnipeg Jets. They're going to be taking on number 3, the Colorado Avalanche, who went on a little bit of a losing streak to end the season, dropped them to the 3 seed in the West, or in the Central Division, I should say. But this is one that won't surprise me if it happens. I'm going to take Colorado here. They're known for going pretty far in the Stanley Cup. I'm going to take Colorado here, and I think it's going to be a quick series. I don't think it's going to be a sweep, but I'm going to take Colorado in 5.
Wow. You got 3 versus the 2 taken in 5, Jackson. That's big, huh? I've got the Colorado Avalanche in 6.
Big fan of Colorado. I really love it out there. So, yeah, I think, no experience in Winnipeg, but going to have to say because of the talent depth they have on the roster, they got Mikko Rantanen and Nathan McKinnon leading the charge.
Ooh.
And, the experience last year winning their 2nd Stanley Cup, they're coming back with a core group of guys that really have some solid experience. And also, home ice advantage, they're high altitude. It's going to be really hard for those other teams to keep up with them. And, yeah, so basically I'm just going with the Avs in this one and not quite going to sweep them, but I agree about 5 games.
I'm going to have to second that. Probably go Avalanche.
Wow.
The family,
4 for 4.
The family lives in Colorado, and also, just as Jake said, they won 2 years ago, so I don't think the Winnipeg Jets are going to beat them. So go Avalanche.
All right, progressing forward, our next series is the number 1 seed in the Pacific Division, the Vancouver Canucks.
Whoa.
And they're going to be taking on the Nashville Predators. This seems interesting. Vancouver is in the playoffs for the first time in quite a bit of time.
Nashville's got a cool story going, though.
And I think, I hate to do this to my sister, and I know she loves her Preds, but this is going to be the one series I think Vancouver sweeps Nashville.
Whoa.
Wow, because I was going Nashville in about 7 probably, and you just pulled out the sweep card, Jimmy Jack.
Sorry, sis.
I'm going Nashville in 7.
Yeah.
So let me just go through my analysis really quick. So the first 2 games in Vancouver, correct. And then the second 2 games are in Nashville.
Correct.
And the first 2 games are at 7 o'clock, very late games. Very late games in Vancouver. Quite a bit earlier in the second 2 games, 4:30 and 2. I'm going to have to say that in Nashville, the visiting team has those earlier times, and they're going to have more time to party in Nashville afterwards. I think Nashville will at least split one of those. And the first 2 games at 7, I just think the Predators look like a much more dominant mascot. So we're going to have to go Nashville in 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to have to say 6 games. 6 games.
Riding off that party train comment, saw a little blurb today about the Predators. They shouldn't have made the playoffs, but they ended up winning their last 16 of 18 games.
A little NC State magic for the
Yeah, all
Nashville
right.
Predators.
Yeah.
there you go,
Ended up
Jimmy
winning
Jack.
16 out of the last 18, and because they weren't allowed to go out when they were playing the Ducks in Anaheim. I think those boys are locked in, so I'm going to take the Preds.
Our final series is one that we have had in the first round for the last 2 straight seasons. And yes, we have it a third time. It's the Edmonton Oilers taking on the Los Angeles Kings. And of course, the Oilers have been dominant in those series. Kings have always had the lower seed. They are the lower seed once again. But however, I think they're going to jump over. The Kings have been pretty good. They won their final game against the Blackhawks in the regular season to get them to the number 3 seed in the Pacific Division. I'm going to roll with the LA Kings here, and I'm going to say the LA Kings get this done, but it's going to go a full length 7-game series here.
7 games, Jackson, huh? I got the Erlenmeyers in 6.
I'm going to pick, I'm always a fan of greatness in history. I want to watch history, greatness, Edmonton Oilers.
I'm be another one of those guys, another sweep here, taking the Oilers. Yeah, the Kings are lame, so screw them.
All right, well, those are our first round predictions, and now just kind of a speed round here, guys. I just want to get your thoughts and predictions on who you think will come out of the East and come out of the West. We'll meet in the Stanley Cup Final, and we'll win the Stanley Cup Final. My original prediction was going to be the Rangers against the Kings, a rematch of a Stanley Cup we had 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, back in 2014. I'm going to say it's going to be the Rangers. They're going to make it out of the East in the Stanley Cup Final. They are going to be facing the Dallas Stars. They're going to make a statement. They went to the Cup Final 4 years ago during the shortened COVID season. And it's going to be the Dallas Stars versus the New York Rangers. And I'm going to have the Dallas Stars win the Stanley Cup. And that is going to go a full 7 games. And an interesting take here. The final score of each of those 7 games will be 2-1.
Each of them.
Each of them. 3 of the 7 will be in overtime, but the other 4 will be in regulation. I'm predicting a full 7-game series. Every single one of those games will end 2-1.
I got the Bruins out of the East. I got to rock with Cam. I got to rock with Boston. And out of the West, I got the Oilers. I got the Oilers versus the Boston Bruins, and I got the Oilers taking it all.
I would take the Bruins all the way.
Surprise.
I think it's gonna be a close series. If you want my truthful and honest answer, I think round 2 against the Florida Panthers will test us. I personally haven't watched very many encounters with the Bruins and the Panthers this season yet, so I don't know how that's gonna go. But I think if we do eke that out, we could definitely win in the conference finals. Granted, you have the Rangers winning, and I don't know how good the Rangers are. But I'll take Boston versus Stars. Boston wins.
Finally, Jake.
So, yeah, last but not least, let's say on the East side, yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to go with Boston Bruins because we are one as a household. And also, I'm going to go in the West side, we're going to go Avalanche. Avalanche! Watch out for the Avalanche on the mountain because they're going to come and get you, and I'm going to take them for the dub. 2 times in 3 years. Let's go.
That was an
The
Avalanche.
beginning of a dynasty.
All right, that'll wrap things up here on the Stanley Cup Pod. Really appreciate you guys listening to my first show. The Stanley Cup playoffs get underway on Saturday, April 20th, with a doubleheader on TBS beginning at 2 o'clock Pacific time. It'll be Game 1 between the Islanders and the Hurricanes, followed at 5 with the Game 1 of Maple Leafs and Bruins. On Sunday will be a quadruple header all across the networks of ESPN. Starting at 9:30 will be Game 1 of Tampa, Florida. That will be on ESPN. Then at noon, Game 1 of Caps Rangers. That will also be on ESPN. 4 o'clock will be Game 1 of Colorado and Winnipeg. That will be on ESPN2. And at 7 o'clock, you will have the Game 1 between Nashville and Vancouver on ESPN. You can catch all the games of the Stanley Cup playoffs across the networks of ESPN, TNT, TBS, True TV, and also streaming on Max. And your home once again for the Stanley Cup Final starting on June 8th will be ABC. And they also kind of hinted that there might be another animated simulcast on Disney Channel and Disney XD during the Stanley Cup Finals. So maybe stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening to the Stanley Cup Pod.
Thank you for having us, Jack. This has been a great time, and we appreciate everything you do. Love you, dude.
Just a side note, after the games, they have the 19U USA National Ping Pong Championship. Please tune in for that. Signing out here, Jake Rowe. See you next time.
Thanks for having us, Jackson. We'll do it again. Adios.